Today we're going to look at two public spaces in downtown Denver. Both are essentially extended sidewalks, occupying the space between important government buildings and the street. The function of both of these spaces as public spaces is as an accessory use to the building's primary uses. The first space is MacIntosh Plaza Park. MacIntosh Plaza occupies the space between the Wellington Webb Municipal Building and West Colfax Avenue. The second lies between the History Colorado Center and East 12th Avenue. The two spaces are quite different in terms of the actual area they occupy. At just over 24,000 square feet, MacIntosh Plaza is almost 2.5 times the size of the space beside History Colorado. However, given their situation occupying similarly sized block faces, the two spaces feel similar in size. Both spaces function primarily as pathways. MacIntosh Plaza is the most direct route from the City and County Building and a neighboring office building housing the Denver Department of Environmental Health and the Denver Elections Division to the attractions and transit corridor along the 16th Street Mall. The sidewalk along Colfax Avenue is also a signed bikeway connecting the Bannock Street bike lane with the protected bike lane on 15th Street. The space alongside the History Colorado Center is also an active sidewalk, connecting two of Denver's high-frequency transit routes, the number 0 on Broadway and the number 10 on 12th Avenue, to a number of attractions and employment centers. Both spaces feature ledges which serve as a place for people to rest. Both provide bicycle parking, and MacIntosh Plaza also features a bus stop. And both buildings have entrances along the neighboring public spaces. We chose these two spaces because they seemed in so many ways similar, but we felt very differently about them. Our observations confirmed our instincts. Few people seem to want to linger in MacIntosh Plaza. Approximately a third of the 117 to 143 people per hour we observed in the space were entering or exiting the Webb building. But it should be noted that the entrance here is not a public one and is accessible only to badged employees. Only 13 to 20% of users lingered. And a majority of those who did were either waiting for a bus or engaged in behavior our society views as antisocial, such as smoking, scavenging, or injecting drugs. Crime is a serious problem at MacIntosh Plaza. Bike theft is endemic, and drug arrests numerous. We observed a group of people injecting drugs here at 8:15 in the morning, just outside one of Denver's most important municipal buildings, where visitors must remove their belts and pass through metal detectors to conduct business with the city. The space comes with instructive signs on its use, but many users seem to pay them little heed. Most cyclists choose the more direct through path, rather than the shared sidewalk, which conflicts with pedestrian transit users. At History Colorado, we observed fewer users, between 56 and 114 people using the space per hour, but a lot more of them, between 20 and 40%, lingered. While a few were smoking, more often they were engaging with the streetscape, pausing to examine the books in the little free library, even taking one, taking pictures with the statue of Molly Brown, or climbing the natural rocks, which some adults seem to misguidedly believe are merely for sitting. We wanted to understand why these two seemingly similar spaces worked so differently. If a space primarily serves as a pathway, how does it engage those who use it? We spoke with one of the principal designers of both spaces, architect Colin Kimberlin. He told us that both were intended to be embracing and welcoming.
And when I think of civic architecture, and certainly European precedents, but these large-scale North American precedents coming from the Columbian Exposition, I think that there is a combination of what I call kind of softer embracing elements and the hard, direct lines of sight. Point structures like the Janus Head statue and the Capitol as source points of all things, versus a softer, embracing, welcoming approach. And I think that's a particularly North American style of civic planning. Rather than embracing in, it actually embraces out so that it actually works with the change in the grid. And we felt was a little bit more embracing and opening toward the city rather than enclosing. It kind of opens up into. Now the reason this is important is if you go back to the plan in the MacIntosh Plaza and the idea that we're turning the corner, there are features of this main plaza that has the Janus Head statue with the plumb bob. There are some key features that actually cross into and cut into what became MacIntosh Plaza, sort of introducing the idea that there is something around the corner and they're part of one composition. Another aspect of this plaza, you can see in this seat wall and the steps that go up to an elevated podium, is the idea that our civic buildings rest on podiums. This is true here and true in the History Center. You see it in the memorials, you see it in the Carnegie Library, you see it in the steps leading both to the Capitol and to the city and county building, that there's a tradition of our civic buildings, I guess going back to kind of the old world, of having them rest on substantial podiums, often of stone, with terraces and with layers. So you can see the layers here, from the sidewalk to the greenery and the oak trees, to a little bit more contemporary concrete walkway, to this elevated area that blends to this plaza and to the street, but also has a series of stairs and steps of wide proportion leading up to a platform upon which to stand, an idea that it's a four-sided experience and there's not a back to these civic plazas and buildings. This lawn was here, so we repaired the lawn. We reclaimed, replanted a number of the oak trees, again in homage to the large-scale trees that populate the Civic Center, whose geometry is already established in the City Beautiful inspired plan. We didn't change that. But because the building was an international style building, and we had extracted what we call the DNA of Annex into the form of the new building, we felt that we needed to continue the contemporary thinking through the art program as well. MacIntosh Park has a series of large granite and Carrara marble blocks in a very modern contemporary vein.
But these tall contemporary forms may not contribute as much to the public realm as the rocks outside History Colorado. This may have to do with the inherent interest of geometric forms versus natural forms, or it may simply come down to height. The rocks at History Colorado lend themselves to sitting and play, while the taller building blocks may lend themselves to less sociable activities.
So whether it's successful or not, I think depends on this last element, and that has to do with programming. There's programming injected in the original idea here, but I will say it was not carried through faithfully as it was originally intended because of 9/11. building has entrances on all sides. There's an axis here that leads from MacIntosh Park straight through the atrium, and the location of the security desk is very purposeful, all the way out to court, and then in this direction as well. That happens on multiple levels. Creating sight lines, emphasizing transparency, the transparency of, alleged transparency of government, and accessibility of government. And then 9/11 happened. And this entrance got closed off to the public, and that entrance got closed off to the public. The original concept for the retail and those city agencies was not to be turned into the atrium, but to be turned equally to the Civic Center. Hence the fourth floor roof deck of the annex building, also looking out to the Civic Center. And again, because of 9/11 and security concerns, and this happened to a whole bunch of our projects, including the Janus headquarters in Cherry Creek, everyone clamped down. And that idea of an active front involving civic scale retail and a subway, and this ability to access the building from all four cardinal directions really disappeared. I'd say it's a nice sidewalk experience that pays homage to history in its forms, its materials, and its dedication to MacIntosh, but it doesn't have all the other layers of experience that were originally intended because of events out of everyone's control.
7 years after the completion of the Webb Building and MacIntosh Plaza, construction began on the History Colorado Center.
A couple things became apparent. One, that we really had to consider, again, that this was a building that could be approached from multiple sides. Between the couplet, Lincoln North, Broadway South, we decided that Broadway is now the opportunity and the front door, and our sight lines and how we respond to the diagonal of Acoma Plaza is the major urban move. Not many people know, but when we looked at the early site plan of building and ground together, you can see we had these angular forms, again inverted, to create that kind of embracing sensibility, not a hard edge, but an edge that would encourage you to funnel in or come in on all sides of buildings. A couple of the elements that are similar in terms of building and site planning together from the Webb Building experience. First of all, we are acknowledging that we have a four-sided building. Now, of course, the fourth side is this parking garage, but the fourth side is also the implied direction to the Civic Center. You have the Broadway face, you have the 12th Avenue face, and you have the Lincoln face. And all of those were important, not only to address building and landscape, but also to create an entry of some sort. The building itself is a metaphor of being grounded on a plain, like the prairie, arising and being built on a foundation of masonry materials, but then topped with these aspirational elements, this airplane wing of aircraft aluminum with a high performance finish. So the podium is the prairie. We have a series of local sandstones in addition to limestone. We have various indigenous and native prairie grasses, especially the one that is surrounding the T.D. Kelsey bison sculpture, the Molly Brown in the aspen grove, and again, all the natural and man-made materials juxtaposed to reinforce the metaphor. But this podium also serves to bring the public up and elevate it off the street. And if you go back to the plan, you can see that there's the same idea of layering horizontally from the back of the curb all the way through to the building, just like at the MacIntosh Plaza in the Webb Building. You have your street and your drop-off zone. You have your terraced stairs with geometries that are eroded for these boulders and natural grasses. And then you have the flat plaza up at the very top that then leads you directly into the building. And in this case, though, we were able to activate and program so that rather than the building simply being a barrier for security reasons, we have this really wonderful treatment, which I show in this photograph, where the exterior materials, the interior materials, the trees, the wood, the furniture, it all works together. This is a completely flat, seamless experience, indoor and outdoor. The glass dematerializes and disappears. Why? Because the civic space is meant to come directly into the building and vice versa, without a hard barrier between the two. And that is also shared with the web building. The idea that the atrium, the Great Hall in this case, is simply an indoor extension of the exterior civic space. You see people out there all the time, going back and forth using the elevated terrace. People feel comfortable in those elevated sort of spaces. But you have a series of prairie grasses and the stone planters. You have the gravel walking path through this garden, and the aspens, of course, quaking aspens with their four-season changes. Just allowing one, whether you're inside or outside, to kind of experience Colorado's environment directly. It also happens to be a convenient location for the school bus drop-off for a couple of reasons. One is very practical and safety. Kids exit on the right side, and all the other one-way streets were not conducive to that. So by coming in on 12, we now have a special entry and an experience just for the school kids with their own entrance. And the programming in the museum has that as sort of an orientation and tour stop before they come in. The idea behind this originally was to feature some more of the geology of Colorado in the rock formations and create seating. How it has evolved is interesting. It's actually taken on a little bit more of a community garden sensibility. It's very visible as you head north on Lincoln. It's often overlooked because its scale is very small compared to the speed of the traffic along Lincoln. But I see people out here very frequently. And you're right, the museum has taken over aspects of it with elements that we didn't necessarily plan for. But that's perfectly fine. We established a framework that allows the actual tenants or users of the building to kind of claim and own and adapt and evolve. And any civic space that can be owned and authored, whether it's inside or outside, will tend to be more lively and have a longer life. It's not about a major expensive piece of commissioned art all the time. It can be, but in this case, given where it is, it very much is captive space that the museum has taken over and done some things with. And that's very important because it operates at a very different scale. And you know, the civic environment needs both kinds of spaces.
Two spaces, very similar in design and purpose, but very different in use and feel. Programming and access changes at MacIntosh Plaza, brought about because of external events and intended to improve security, may have actually had the opposite effect. While the space alongside History Colorado feels welcoming and safe for adults and school children alike, MacIntosh Plaza has become a place to travel through quickly, where lingering is discouraged by the space itself as well as some of its users. During one observation session, we were threatened by one of the other park users.
I'm gonna finish this. You may be in the video, sorry.